Every script I write, every comic I create, I always learn something new. And this is why I love to create these videos as a beginner comic book creator, because hopefully my experiences resonate with a lot of you, especially those who are on their own creative journey and don't know how to navigate through the process. And with that being said, everything that I've experienced and talked about here isn't the golden rule, but it's my experience from my failures and how I corrected those mistakes and still learning throughout the entire process. And hopefully it can help gear you or point you in the right direction. But with that being said, in our last video, we talked about where story ideas actually come from, and we explored how these ideas come to be, whether it's from life experience, music, and if you've been pretty much inspired by other creators yourself, and how during that idea phase, you shouldn't worry about structure. It's just allowing your imagination to run wild. But eventually, those ideas need to have some direction. So for me, that's where character conceptualization phase begins. And over the years, I started looking back at the process much differently now that I've actually released my first comic book series, Varion Keller's Vampire Killers. So when I began the first concept for Varion Keller's Vampire Killers and the Venus Orion Comics Universe in general, I always looked at the characters came first. I spent hours trying to figure out characters' motivations, their powers, their backstories. And the more and more I think about it today, the more I realized that that was the biggest mistake, or it made things a lot harder than they were supposed to be. And why do I say that? How can I spend time that I had a hard time trying to figure out these characters when I don't even understand the world that they live in, because I haven't even created the world yet? And like the real world, the environment shapes that individual. So the same thing could be said about fictional characters. And when I came up with the idea of Varion Keller's Vampire Killers, I only had 4 characters. And these are characters that I came up with years ago when I was much younger. And that's what they were. They were just characters. They were just blank slates. They had no personality, no motivation, and I didn't even know where to begin. All I had was names. And I wouldn't even say names. They were more like aliases. Young Rav, Keo, Strike, and of course, Varion Keller himself. I had to do something quite opposite for Varion Keller himself, is because that was his actual name. He didn't have an alias. So I'm just sitting there looking at these characters and have no idea what to do with them. Since I had no idea what to do with these characters, I had to take a different approach. So instead of starting with characters, I decided to start with the world, or I was called the sandbox. Again, this isn't the only way to do it. Some creators begin with characters first, and that's perfectly fine. But in my case, I had to create the world before I can be able to create the characters. And that's simply what actually worked for me. I began asking questions about the world instead, and how society functions, who's in power, how does the government operate, and what do people believe? How does the combat work? What are the laws? What's considered normal in this world? Because once I started answering those questions, my characters slowly began answering themselves. So I learned early on during the process to try to stop trying to complete the character. Stop trying to figure out their age, their name, their favorite foods, and what drives and motivate them. Instead, treat these characters like blank canvases. I just wanted a rough concept. Maybe this person becomes a protagonist, or maybe this person is a villain. Maybe they're just trying to live inside this world. Nothing was finalized. I gave myself permission to experiment. The same concept that I've given you in the previous video about the ideas phase. You're not trying to spend your time trying to complete it and come up with this epic story, this epic idea during the idea phase when it comes to storytelling. The same approach can be said about creating characters. Just run wild. Don't try to figure it all out. Just start throwing ideas out there. Ironically, once I stopped trying to make my characters become perfect, the more they start to feel much natural and authentic. And another thing that I learned that I took a valuable lesson from is that when it comes to creating characters and trying to form who they are, their personality isn't written, it's discovered. And what do I mean by that? I don't think that their personality comes from simply from writing a profile. I think that personality comes from how they respond to a given situation that they're in. Like, throw them into situations and see how they handle pressure, and how they respond to authority, and how they treat people weaker than themselves, and how do they deal with failure. These moments taught me far more about the characters than any other biography that I have written for them in their profiles. These moments taught me more about my characters than the biography ever did when I formed their profiles. Sometimes I've written conversations that was never intended for the comic. I just wanted to hear them talk. And every once in a while, they completely surprised me. That's when I knew I was starting to understand who they really were. As I kept developing the world, the characters began to interact with it. The government influenced them, the religions influenced them, the technology influenced them, the power system influenced them. They stopped feeling like ideas, and now they start feeling like people that actually belong there. And this is how I came up with Neo-Delphia. And if you watch my older video where I explained where Neo-Delphia came from, which was the idea and the concept from where I live, which is Philadelphia, once I started to place those 4 characters, which is Hezekiah, Isaiah, and Caleb and Varian Keller themselves, into that environment, this is where the characters begin to unfold and shape themselves and actually begin to become more real. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I enjoy world building. The more I understand the world, the easier it becomes to understand the people that's living within it. And this is why I decided to go with world first in characters, because once you start to have a foundation for your world, then creating characters and their motivations and who they are as an individual becomes that much easier. And don't rush with the story. This was a mistake that I made earlier on. I always wanted to jump right into the story and once I figured out how my characters are after building the world. Now I spend more time just allowing my characters to exist. And this is something that I learned and taught myself, is that I will create mock-up scenarios and I place my characters in the scenarios and see how they respond within the rules that I set within these scenarios. And you'll be surprised at how these characters will interact, which I mentioned in my last video, where your characters begin to take a life of their own, and you as the author and the writer can't control them because you're allowing them to breathe and you're allowing them to make their own decisions. And when you allow that to happen, you'll be surprised of how much you develop as a writer when it comes to developing characters. And this is just simply exploring the sandbox in which you have created for your characters in the world in your universe. And that's where some of the best ideas come from. And after that, eventually the story begins to find you. Once I have my world and once I have my characters that belong in that world, something interesting began to happen. Scenes begin to appear naturally. Conflicts start to make sense. Relationships start to form on their own. And instead of forcing plot points, I started asking, what would this character naturally do in a given situation? And that question helped me more than anything else while developing Venus Orion Comics in its universe. And because of that, I've learned so much. I learned to stop trying to create perfect characters or establish characters very early on. Instead of doing that, I learned that instead of chasing perfection for characters, I learned to chase discovery. And for me personally, discovery is much more fulfilling as a creator, creating and building worlds first and then establishing characters within them. Again, this isn't the golden rule. This is something that I learned while building the universe for Venus Orion Comics. And maybe that's something that's worth experimenting with your own stories. But that pretty much wraps up this video. I hope you guys got something from this video and how I approach character concepts when coming up with characters. And I've learned that it was much easier for me to build the world first. And then once the world is established, it becomes much more natural and easier to create the characters. The characters pretty much create themselves. But I definitely want to hear in the comment sections below, what is your process when it comes to creating characters and worlds? Do you create the character first and then the world? Or do you do the process that I have favored the most, the world and then the characters? I think these would be interesting, thought-provoking conversations to have in the comment sections. And I definitely want to hear you guys and what you think about that. So if this video definitely helped you, hit that like button and leave your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button if you want to follow my journey as a comic book creator or just a creator in general, to be able to understand how the process of shaping your own destiny, your own journey as a creator. So this is Brian Howard Blaston Jr. signing off.